The word shattered 6 months of silence like a gunshot through stone. Mama! Every head in the royal hall turned toward the 3-year-old heir standing at the base of the dais, his small hand extended not toward the 47 carefully selected Omega candidates arranged in their finest silks and jewels, but toward the trembling servant girl trying to disappear into the shadows near the service entrance. The girl held a stack of fresh linens against her chest like a shield, her honey-colored eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes from suddenly becoming visible when survival depends on remaining unseen. King Marcus Theron stood frozen on his throne, his powerful frame rigid beneath the ceremonial armor he still wore from the morning's border inspection. His son Adrian hadn't spoken since the day his mother died. 6 months of the most renowned healers, the gentlest nursemaids, the most patient tutors, all failing to coax a single word from the child's lips. 6 months of watching his boy retreat further into whatever dark place trauma creates in young minds. That unreachable distance Marcus recognized from 100 soldiers' eyes after their first real combat. And now this. The girl in question, a young Omega named Elena Ashford, looked absolutely terrified. She was small, perhaps 20 at most, with soft features and skin that held the warmth of summer wheat. Her simple linen dress marked her station as clearly as the noble Omega's elaborate gowns marked theirs. She had been assigned to the palace kitchens 3 weeks ago, one more invisible servant in a staff of hundreds, notable only for her absolute commitment to remaining unnoticed. "Mama!" Adrian said it again, louder this time, his small voice cracking with an emotion Marcus hadn't heard from him in half a year. The child pulled against his nursemaid's grip, his little arms reaching toward Elena with desperate urgency, his face transforming from the blank mask he'd worn since Isabella's death into something alive and aching and utterly heartbreaking. Marcus descended from his throne, each measured step echoing through the sudden silence of the hall. His silver eyes never left the Omega who had somehow reached his unreachable son. The crowd of noble candidates watched in stunned silence, each having traveled from across the kingdom for the chance to become the new queen, each now watching their carefully constructed futures crumble as a kitchen servant accomplished what they could not. "What is your name?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority that made even the bravest warriors check their posture. The command voice, Isabella used to call it, the tone that expected immediate and complete compliance. Elena dropped into the lowest curtsy her shaking legs could manage, her head bowed so deeply her forehead nearly touched her knees. The linens tumbled from her arms, forgotten. "Your Majesty, I am Elena Ashford, nobody of consequence. Please forgive the intrusion. I was only bringing fresh bedding to the north wing. I will leave immediately if it pleases you." But Adrian had broken free from his nursemaid. The boy ran across the polished marble floor, his small feet slapping against stone with the particular rhythm of a child who has found something precious and fears it will be taken away. He crashed into Elena's legs, wrapping his arms around her knees, burying his face in her simple dress. And then he began to cry, great heaving sobs that seemed to release months of stored grief, the kind of crying that shakes a small body from crown to heel. Elena stood paralyzed, her arms hovering uselessly at her sides. Every instinct clearly screamed at her to comfort the child, but touching the air without permission was a crime that could cost her life. She looked up at Marcus with pleading eyes, and he saw something in that honey-gold gaze that made his breath catch. Not calculation, not ambition, just pure, desperate compassion for a grieving child, and the terrible uncertainty of someone who has learned that kindness can be punished as easily as cruelty. "You may touch him," Marcus said quietly. The permission released whatever had been holding Elena rigid. She dropped to her knees and gathered Adrian into her arms. The child clung to her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had become untethered and dangerous. She began to hum, a soft, wordless melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient, older than words, the kind of sound a mother makes without thinking when soothing frightened young. Her hand stroked Adrian's dark curls with infinite gentleness, and Marcus watched in amazement as his son, his precious boy, who had become a ghost of himself, quieted in this unknown Omega's arms. The sobs gradually subsided into hiccups, then into shuddering breaths, and finally into peaceful stillness. Adrian didn't let go of her, but his grip softened from desperate to trusting, his small fingers unclenching from white-knuckled panic into the loose hold of a child who has found safety. "Impossible," breathed Lady Seraphine Blackwood from among the assembled candidates. She was beautiful in the way weapons are beautiful, all clean lines and purposeful design. Her family had held the eastern border for 200 years, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her value or her place. "She's a servant, Your Majesty. No lineage, no standing, no training in childcare or governance. How could she possibly reach the heir when 47 qualified candidates have failed?" "She has my son's first words in 6 months," Marcus interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "She has his trust, which no one else has been able to earn. That is worth more than all the bloodlines in the kingdom combined." He knelt beside Elena and Adrian, bringing himself to their level. Up close, he could see that Elena was even younger than he'd first thought, barely past her 20th year. But it was her eyes that held him, honey gold and filled with such genuine compassion as she looked at his son that Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built after Isabella's death beginning to crumble. "How did you do this?" he asked softly, genuinely wanting to understand. Elena's cheeks flushed pink. "I did not do anything special, Your Majesty. I have seen the young lord in the gardens sometimes when I am hanging linens to dry. He watches the birds with such focus. I started leaving seeds out on the bench, and we would watch them together, though we never spoke. I did not know he could not speak. I thought he was simply quiet, like me. I never meant to overstep my position. You've been spending time with my son." Marcus felt he should be angry at this breach of protocol, but all he could feel was a desperate gratitude that bordered on pain. Someone had been caring for Adrian when everyone else had failed. "Only from a distance, Your Majesty," Elena said quickly. "I never approached him directly. I would never presume. But he seemed so deeply sad, and the birds made him smile sometimes, so I just wanted him to have that. Something small that was his alone, that cost nothing and demanded nothing from him." Adrian had fallen asleep in Elena's arms, his tear-stained face peaceful for the first time in months. His small fist was tangled in the fabric of her dress, holding on even in sleep, as if his unconscious mind feared she would disappear if he let go. Marcus made a decision that would shock the kingdom and change everything. He rose to his feet and addressed the assembled crowd, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a king who had led men through hell and brought them home alive. "The selection is over. There will be no queen chosen from among the noble houses today." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the hall like wind through wheat. The Omega candidates looked at each other in confusion and growing outrage. Several had traveled for weeks to be here. All had prepared their entire lives for this possibility. "Instead," Marcus continued, "I am appointing Elena Ashford as royal companion to my son and heir. She will have quarters in the family wing of the palace. She will have unrestricted access to Adrian whenever he needs her. And she will be under my personal protection, effective immediately." The implications of that last statement were not lost on anyone present. To be under the king's personal protection meant Elena was untouchable, elevated far above her station, placed in a position that many would envy and some would resent. It also meant that any threat to her was a direct threat to the crown itself. "Your Majesty, you cannot be serious." Lady Seraphine stepped forward, her beautiful face tight with controlled fury. "A common servant in the royal quarters. What will the noble houses say? What will the High Council declare when they hear of this decision?" "The council will say what I tell them to say," Marcus replied coldly. "I am still king, Lady Seraphine, and as king I do what is best for my heir. Right now what is best for Adrian is having Elena near him. That is not negotiable. The question is whether the noble houses can understand that a king's first duty is to his son's well-being, or whether they value political convenience over a child's healing." He looked down at Elena, who was staring up at him with an expression of pure shock bordering on panic. "Can you stand without waking him? We need to move Adrian to his chambers." Elena nodded mutely and allowed Marcus to help her to her feet, the sleeping child cradled between them. As they walked together through the stunned crowd, Marcus found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. She barely came up to his shoulder, this small Omega who had accomplished what 47 carefully selected candidates and dozens of expensive experts could not. The walk to Adrian's chambers was silent, except for the soft sound of their footsteps and the distant murmur of shocked conversation fading behind them. The royal quarters occupied the oldest part of the palace, where stone walls held centuries of history and tall windows looked out over the ancient forest that surrounded the capital like a living barrier. Adrian's room was filled with toys he no longer played with and books he no longer read, relics of the happy child he'd been before loss stole his voice and his father's attention. Elena laid Adrian gently in his bed, carefully extracting her dress from his grip and replacing it with his favorite stuffed wolf. The child stirred but didn't wake, his small face relaxed in true rest. "He has not slept well since his mother died," Marcus said quietly from the doorway, watching his son with the particular ache that comes from loving someone you cannot protect from their own pain. Nightmares every night, waking up screaming for her. But he looks peaceful now, truly peaceful. Elena smoothed the blanket over Adrian with tender care before stepping back. "I am deeply sorry for your loss, Your Majesty, and for his. Losing a parent so young, the pain must be unbearable for one so small." "You speak as one who understands from experience," Marcus observed. Elena nodded, her eyes distant with old grief. "I lost my mother when I was 7, my father when I was 15. I understand what it is to feel that emptiness, that sense that the world has become fundamentally unsafe because the people who made it safe are gone." "Is that why you left the seeds? Because you understood his pain?" "Yes," Elena said simply. "Small kindnesses helped me survive my grief when I was young. I thought perhaps they might help him too, though I had no expectation that they would. I simply could not watch him suffer without at least trying to offer something, even if it was only birdseed and patience." She turned to face Marcus fully, and her expression was earnest in a way that suggested she genuinely believed what she was about to say. "Your Majesty, I meant what I said in the hall. I never intended to overstep my position. I know my place in the world. I do not seek to rise above my station or to claim anything I have not earned. If you want me to help with Adrian, I will do so gladly and count it an honor. But please do not feel obligated because of what happened today. I am certain in time he will respond to others as well, people far more qualified than a kitchen servant to guide a young prince." Marcus studied her carefully. She genuinely believed what she was saying. She had no idea that what she'd done was nearly impossible, that teams of experts had failed where she'd succeeded simply by being kind without expectation of reward. "Elena," he said gently, moving to stand closer to her, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes and the flour still dusting her sleeve from whatever kitchen work she'd been doing before fate brought her to his hall. "Do you know how many people have tried to reach my son in the last 6 months?" She shook her head, her expression wary. 47 healers, teachers, and caregivers, Marcus said. Child specialists from across the kingdom and beyond. Noble omegas hoping to win favor by comforting the heir. Counselors trained in trauma and grief. 47 people, each supposedly qualified and trained, and not one of them could get Adrian to speak, to cry, to show any emotion at all. He had locked himself away somewhere I could not reach him, and I was terrified I was losing him piece by piece, watching him disappear into the same darkness that took his mother. Elena's eyes widened with genuine shock. "I did not know. I truly thought he was simply shy and grieving in his own way." "You are the 48th person to try," Marcus continued, "and you are the only one who succeeded, not because you tried harder or knew more, but because you did not try at all. Because you simply offered kindness with no expectation of reward or advancement. Because you saw a sad child and wanted to help him, not because helping him would improve your position, but because leaving him in pain was unacceptable to you." Marcus took another step closer. "That is not something I take lightly, Elena. That is not something I will dismiss simply because tradition says I should choose a noble omega for political advantage. My son cannot wait for political convenience. His healing cannot be delayed for propriety's sake. And right now, whether you understand it or not, you are the key to that healing." "But the noble houses," Elena protested weakly, "the alliance marriages, the political advantages that come from strategic unions, can all wait," Marcus finished firmly. "My son cannot wait. His recovery cannot be postponed. And yes, I understand the political cost of this decision. I understand that choosing you over 47 noble candidates will create enemies and complications. But I am not asking you to be queen, Elena. I am asking you to be Adrian's companion and guide, to continue doing what you have already done, offering him kindness and patience and the space to heal at his own pace." He paused, making sure she understood the weight of what he was offering. "You will be compensated appropriately for this role. You will be given quarters that reflect your importance to the heir, and you will be protected from anyone who tries to use you as a pawn in their political games or punish you for accepting a position you did not seek." A small sound from his bed stopped Elena's reply. Adrian was stirring in his sleep, his hand reaching out unconsciously, searching for something. Without thinking, Elena returned to the bedside and took the child's small hand in hers. Adrian settled immediately, a small smile crossing his sleeping face. Marcus felt that crack in his chest widen into something that might have been hope. His son was smiling. Actually smiling. "Stay tonight," Marcus heard himself say. "There is a chair beside his bed. I will have proper accommodations arranged by morning, but tonight just stay in case he wakes and needs you." Elena looked torn between duty and desire, her free hand twisting in the fabric of her skirt. "Your Majesty, it would not be proper for me to remain alone with him overnight without supervision." "I will be in my chambers through that door." Marcus indicated the connecting entrance between his rooms and Adrian's. "The night nursemaid will be stationed just outside this door. You will not be alone with him in any way that could be considered inappropriate. But he is holding your hand, Elena. He has not reached for anyone in 6 months. Please let him have this tonight." The plea in his voice, the vulnerability of a king begging a servant for help with his child, seemed to break through Elena's resistance. She nodded slowly and settled into the chair, her hand still clasped in Adrian's small one. "Thank you," Marcus said softly. He called for the nursemaid and gave strict instructions that Elena was to have anything she needed and was not to be disturbed unless she specifically requested help. Then, reluctantly, he withdrew to his own chambers, though he left the connecting door slightly ajar so he could hear if Adrian woke. For the first time in 6 months, Marcus Theron slept through the night without being woken by his son's screams. Morning came with birdsong and golden light streaming through the palace windows. Marcus dressed quickly in simple training leathers rather than royal regalia and moved to check on Adrian, expecting to find the child still asleep and Elena exhausted from her vigil. Instead, he found them in the small garden that adjoined Adrian's rooms, accessible through the wide glass doors that Isabella had insisted on when they'd designed the family wing. She'd wanted their son to have immediate access to growing things, to life and light, and the simple peace of watching things bloom. Adrian was scattering seeds on the flagstones, his small face intent and focused in a way Marcus hadn't seen in months. Elena sat on the stone bench nearby, naming each bird as it landed to feed. "That's a sparrow. See his brown feathers and the small beak perfect for seeds? And there, that's a finch, the one with the red marking on his head. Oh, look, Adrian, a dove. See how gentle she is when she lands?" "Dove," Adrian repeated clearly, his voice stronger than it had been yesterday. "The bird with white feathers." Marcus had to grip the doorframe to steady himself. His son was speaking, forming sentences, engaging with the world. "Yes, exactly right," Elena said with such genuine delight that Marcus felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "You are so clever, Adrian. You notice everything about them." The child beamed at her praise and scattered more seeds, clearly hoping to attract more birds to identify. Marcus watched them for several minutes, afraid that if he announced his presence the spell would break and Adrian would retreat back into silence. But Elena noticed him eventually, her expression immediately becoming worried, as if she'd done something wrong by taking Adrian outside. "No, do not get up," Marcus said quickly, raising a hand to forestall her movement. "I am only watching. Please continue." "I did not mean to interrupt." Adrian looked up and saw his father. For a moment, Marcus braced himself for the familiar withdrawal, the way his son had been pulling away from him for months, creating distance that felt like punishment, even though Marcus knew it was just pain. But instead, Adrian ran to him and hugged his legs with the same desperate affection he'd shown Elena yesterday. "Papa!" Adrian said excitedly, tugging on Marcus's hand with surprising strength for such a small child. "Come see the birds. Elena knows all their names. She's teaching me." Marcus's vision blurred with sudden tears he had no right to shed in front of subordinates. His son had called him Papa. He'd been afraid he would never hear that word again, had started to believe that Isabella's death had cost him not only his mate, but also his child's trust and affection. He let Adrian pull him into the garden and sat on the stone bench beside Elena. watching as his son enthusiastically scattered seeds and narrated the arrival of each bird in his limited but growing vocabulary. It was the most normal, the most wonderfully mundane thing Marcus had experienced in 6 months, and he treasured every second of it. "You have given me back my son," he said quietly to Elena, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "In less than a day you have returned something I thought was lost forever." Elena kept her eyes on Adrian, but Marcus saw the emotion in her face, the way her throat worked as she swallowed hard. "He was never truly lost, Your Majesty. He was only hurt and frightened. He needed someone who understood that speaking is not the only way to communicate, that sometimes silence is a form of self-protection rather than withdrawal. The birds helped because they do not demand words. They simply exist, beautifully and freely, and there is profound comfort in that kind of presence." "You are very wise for someone so young," Marcus observed. "Not wise," Elena said softly, "only experienced in grief." She finally looked at him, and the vulnerability in her honey-gold eyes made his breath catch. "I know what it feels like when the world betrays you, when speaking about your pain makes it more real, more permanent. Silence feels safer sometimes, like if you can just stay quiet enough the bad things might forget about you." "Is that what happened to you? After your father died?" Elena nodded slowly. "After my father died, I did not speak for a month. I was living with a distant cousin who had taken me in out of obligation rather than love. Speaking felt like too much effort, like I would shatter completely if I tried to form words around the size of my pain. So I just went silent and hoped no one would notice me enough to ask questions I could not answer." "Did anyone help you?" Elena's smile was sad and distant. "Everyone was dealing with their own struggles, Your Majesty. My cousin had 6 children of her own and very limited resources. I was just another mouth to feed, another burden in a household that could barely support itself. I learned to be quiet, to be useful, to not take up space I had not earned through service." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, which somehow made it more heartbreaking. Marcus felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. This Omega had survived loss and neglect and loneliness, and had somehow emerged with her kindness intact, with her capacity for compassion undamaged by experiences that would have hardened most people into bitterness. "You have earned space here," Marcus said firmly, needing her to understand this. "You have earned it 100 times over, just by being who you are. I want you to truly understand that, Elena. This is not charity or temporary sympathy. This is recognition of genuine value." Before Elena could respond, Adrian ran back to them clutching a handful of flowers he'd picked from the garden beds, small purple blooms that Isabella had planted 2 years ago, and that somehow still returned every spring, despite her absence. "For Mama," Adrian announced, offering the flowers to Elena with the utmost seriousness. "Pretty flowers for pretty Mama." Elena's face went soft with such pure affection that Marcus had to look away from the intimacy of the moment, from the way his son had claimed this woman as family without hesitation or doubt. She accepted the flowers gravely, as if they were the most precious gift in the world rather than common blooms a child had grabbed without permission. "Thank you, sweet one," she said gently. "They are beautiful, just like your kindness." She tucked one of the small flowers behind her ear, and Adrian giggled with delight, the sound of his laughter so genuine and free that it nearly undid Marcus completely. He had thought that sound was gone forever, lost with Isabella in the ambush that had taken her life and so many others. But here it was, resurrected by this small Omega who asked for nothing and gave everything without counting the cost. Over the following days, a new routine established itself in the palace. Elena moved into a suite of rooms in the family wing, chambers that had once belonged to Isabella's younger sister before her marriage to a southern lord. The quarters were far too grand for a servant, and the palace staff did not quite know how to categorize Elena anymore. She was not nobility, but she lived among them. She was not family, but the air called her Mama. She was not a concubine, but she had the king's protection and favor. Elena herself seemed uncomfortable with the elevation, constantly offering to help with tasks far below her new station, much to the amusement and occasional frustration of the household staff. But with Adrian she was perfect, coaxing him out of his shell word by word, smile by smile, creating structure and routine that felt safe rather than restrictive. Marcus found himself drawn to them more and more often, finding excuses to join their activities, to observe their interactions, to simply exist in their presence. He told himself it was to monitor Adrian's progress, to ensure Elena was performing her duties appropriately. But he knew it was more than that, though he was not yet ready to examine exactly what that more might mean. 3 days after Elena's appointment, Marcus was reviewing border reports in his study when Captain Roderick Stone entered without knocking, a liberty granted by 20 years of friendship and shared combat. Roderick was a bear of a man, broad-shouldered and gruff-voiced, a beta who had saved Marcus's life more times than either of them could count, and who felt no compunction about speaking uncomfortable truths when necessary. "The Council is calling for emergency session," Roderick said without preamble. "High Lord Ashmore is gathering support to challenge your decision about the servant girl." "Her name is Elena," Marcus said quietly, not looking up from his reports. "And she is no longer a servant. She is royal companion to the heir, a position I created specifically to recognize her value to this kingdom." "A position that has no precedent and no political advantage," Roderick countered. "Marcus, I love you like a brother, but you are thinking with your heart instead of your head on this. The noble houses are furious. You canceled the selection without warning, elevated a nobody to a position of significant influence, and you did it all for a woman who got your son to speak a few words." "She did more than get him to speak a few words," Marcus said, finally looking up to meet his friend's concerned gaze. "She reached him, Roderick. She found a way through his grief when 47 experts failed. She gave him back his voice and his smile and his capacity for joy. Do you have any idea how valuable that is? Do you understand what it means to watch your child disappear into trauma and be utterly powerless to help them?" Roderick's expression softened slightly. "I understand that you are a father who loves his son, but you are also a king who has responsibilities beyond your personal feelings. The Valdris situation is escalating. We need alliance marriages, Marcus. We need the troops and resources those alliances would bring. Seraphine's house alone could provide 5,000 trained soldiers for the eastern border. And what good are 5,000 soldiers if I cannot function as their king because I am too consumed with worry about my son?" Marcus stood, his considerable height and presence filling the room. "Adrian's trauma was affecting everything, Roderick. My ability to lead, to make clear decisions, to focus on strategy and governance. I was carrying his pain on top of my own grief for Isabella, and it was destroying my judgment." He moved to the window, looking out over the training yards where soldiers drilled in precise formations. "Elena has helped Adrian, yes, but she has also helped me. She has shown me methods for processing grief that actually work, techniques her father's medics taught her when he returned from the wars with his own trauma. She understands what the healers do not, that sometimes what looks like simple sadness is actually something deeper, something that requires different treatment." Roderick was quiet for a long moment. "You are saying the boy has combat trauma? But he is only 3 years old. He was not in battle." "He watched his mother die violently," Marcus said, and the words tasted like ash and failure. "The ambush happened 20 yards from where Adrian was playing. He saw Isabella fall. He heard the screams. He smelled the blood. His nursemaid grabbed him and ran, but not before he witnessed things no child should ever see. That kind of experience leaves marks, Roderick, scars that do not show on the body but run just as deep." Roderick's face had gone pale. "I did not realize. The report said he was safely away when Isabella fell." "The reports were kind," Marcus said bitterly. "They were written to protect a king's feelings and a kingdom's morale. But the truth is, my son watched his mother die defending others, and that broke something in him that I did not know how to fix. Elena knows how to fix it, because she fixed herself after watching her own father slowly destroyed by similar nightmares and terrors." There was a knock at the door, and Commander Garrett Pike entered, his empty left sleeve pinned neatly at the shoulder where his arm had ended 6 months ago in the same ambush that took Isabella. Garrett was a tactical genius, cold and brilliant, and utterly without sentiment when it came to military matters. "The council is assembled," he said. "High Lord Ashmore is demanding explanation for your decision regarding the servant Elena. He has the support of at least 8 houses, possibly more." Marcus straightened his shoulders, feeling the weight of command settle over him like familiar armor. "Then we should not keep them waiting. Roderick, Garrett, you will accompany me. I want the council to understand that my inner circle supports this decision." "Do we support it?" Garrett asked bluntly. "Because I am not certain I do, Marcus. The girl may be useful with children, but she is not a strategic asset. Seraphine would have brought us alliances. What does Elena bring us? Hope, Marcus said simply. She brings hope that healing is possible, that trauma can be overcome, that service and compassion matter as much as swords and strategies. You may not think that is a strategic asset, Garrett, but I assure you it is. A king who cannot heal his own son is a king who cannot fully lead his people. Elena has made me more effective as a ruler by helping me become more whole as a father. He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at his two most trusted advisors. I am not asking you to lie to the council. If you believe my decision is wrong, say so. But understand that I have made this choice after careful thought, not impulsive emotion. I know the political cost. I accept it. The question is whether you trust my judgment enough to stand beside me while I pay that price. Roderick and Garrett exchanged glances, the silent communication of men who had fought together long enough to read each other without words. Finally, Roderick nodded slowly. I will stand with you, he said, though I reserve the right to tell you later that you are an idiot. As will I, Garrett added. But for the record, I still think Seraphine was the more strategic choice. Marcus smiled grimly, noted and acknowledged. Now let us go explain to the High Council why the kingdom's future depends on a 20-year-old Omega who knows how to leave birdseed in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The council chamber was a circular room in the oldest part of the palace, with high vaulted ceilings and narrow windows that had once served as archer positions during ancient sieges. 16 chairs arranged in a ring, no head table, symbolizing that all voices held equal weight in this space, even though everyone knew the king's voice inevitably carried more authority than the others. High Lord Garrett Ashmore stood as Marcus entered, his silver hair and lined face marking him as the eldest member of the council and the unofficial leader of the traditionalist faction. He was not a cruel man or a stupid one. He had served 3 kings with distinction and genuine wisdom, and his concerns came from experience rather than malice. Your Majesty, Ashmore said formally, the council has requested this session to discuss your recent appointment of the servant Elena Ashford to the newly created position of Royal Companion. We seek clarification on several matters. Ask your questions, High Lord, Marcus said calmly, taking his seat in the circle. I will answer what I can. First, Ashmore began, can you explain the strategic value of elevating a common servant over 47 noble candidates, each of whom brought significant political and military alliances? The strategic value is my son's recovery, Marcus said bluntly. Adrian has not spoken in 6 months. He has not laughed, not played, not engaged with the world in any meaningful way. In one day, Elena accomplished what 6 months of expert care could not. She reached him. She brought him back. If you do not see the strategic value in having a functional heir rather than a traumatized child who cannot communicate or connect, then I question your understanding of this kingdom's long-term stability. A murmur ran through the council. Several members nodded thoughtfully, others looked skeptical. Second question, Ashmore continued. What happens when the Valdris forces currently massing at our northern border decide to test our defenses? Seraphine's betrothal would have brought us 5,000 soldiers. The other candidates represented similar alliances. How do you propose to defend the kingdom without those resources? Before Marcus could answer, the chamber doors opened and a young messenger entered, his face pale with fear or urgency or both. He went directly to Ashmore and whispered something that made the old lord's face go rigid with shock. What is it? Marcus demanded, rising to his feet. Ashmore's voice was carefully controlled, but Marcus could hear the accusation beneath it. A rider just arrived from the northern border, Your Majesty. The town of Greystone has been attacked. Valdris forces, approximately 3,000 strong. The garrison was overrun. Greystone is burning. How many casualties? Marcus heard his voice go flat, the combat commander's tone that required facts without emotion. The garrison at Greystone numbered 500, Ashmore said. Early reports suggest total loss. The garrison commander sent a final message before the fall. 127 confirmed dead, the rest missing, presumed captured or killed. 127 soldiers dead. Men Marcus had probably commanded at some point. Soldiers with families and futures now reduced to numbers in a casualty report. The council chamber was utterly silent. This is the cost of your choice, High Lord Castor from the western border said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. Seraphine's troops were to reinforce Greystone. If you had accepted her betrothal, those men would still be alive. Marcus felt the words like blows, each one landing with the weight of truth he could not deny. He had made a choice. That choice had consequences. 127 consequences, each with a name and a story, and people who loved them. "I accept responsibility for this loss," Marcus said quietly. "I made a decision that had military implications, and I will bear the weight of those implications." "Will you?" Ashmore asked, and his tone was no longer respectful. "Will you bear it, Your Majesty? Or will 127 families bear it while you enjoy the comfort of the servant girl who has captured your attention?" Marcus looked around the circle and saw judgment in every face. Even Roderick and Garrett looked grim, their earlier support wavering under the reality of fresh casualties and a burning border town. "The Council demands you reconsider your decision regarding Elena Ashford," Ashmore continued, pressing his advantage. "Marry Lady Seraphine, secure the Eastern Alliance, before more soldiers die for your personal preferences." "I need time to consider," Marcus said, the words feeling like surrender even as he spoke them. "You have 60 days," Ashmore said. "Prove that Elena Ashford brings value to this kingdom beyond childcare. Prove she is worth the blood price we are paying, or accept that some choices, however personally appealing, are luxuries a king cannot afford." The session ended with no resolution, only the terrible silence of men contemplating cost and consequence. Marcus left the chamber flanked by Roderick and Garrett, neither of whom spoke until they were safely back in Marcus's private study. 127, Garrett said quietly. 127 dead because Seraphine withdrew her house's support from the Northern Territories when you rejected her. "I know," Marcus said. His voice was hollow. "I know exactly what I have done." "Do you?" Roderick asked, and his tone was harder than Marcus had ever heard it. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you chose a pretty face over your soldiers' lives. And I need you to tell me, brother, that there is more to this decision than I am seeing. I need you to tell me that 127 men did not die so you could keep a servant girl close to your bed." Marcus turned on his friend with fury so sudden and sharp that Roderick actually stepped back. "She is not in my bed," he snarled. "She sleeps in her own quarters and spends her days teaching my son how to speak again. If you think this is about sex or romance or any kind of personal indulgence, you understand nothing." "Then what is it about?" Garrett demanded. "Make us understand, Marcus, because right now all we see is dead soldiers and a king who chose personal comfort over strategic necessity." Marcus sank into his chair and put his head in his hands, feeling the weight of those 127 lives like stones on his shoulders. "It is about being able to function," he said quietly. "It is about being whole enough to lead." When Adrian went silent, when Isabella died, I started making mistakes, small ones at first. Missed details in reports, delayed decisions, choosing safe options instead of effective ones because I could not think clearly through my grief. You both know this. You have both covered for me these past 6 months while I tried to hold myself together and failed. He looked up at them, letting them see the exhaustion and pain he usually hid. Elena did not just heal Adrian. She showed me how to heal myself. She taught me techniques for processing trauma that actually work. Methods her father's medics used with veterans. And yes, maybe there were other ways to find that healing. Maybe I could have hired the right expert eventually, or given myself more time to recover naturally. But I did not have more time. This kingdom did not have more time. I needed to be functional immediately, and Elena made that possible. There was a long silence. Finally, Roderick spoke, his voice gentler. "So you are saying she is a strategic asset, just not in the way we expected." "I am saying she saved my ability to command," Marcus said. "And if the cost of that is 127 soldiers now rather than thousands later, when my impaired judgment leads to catastrophic military failure, then perhaps it is a cost worth paying. But make no mistake, I feel every one of those deaths. I will carry them with me, and I will prove to the Council and to you and to this entire kingdom that Elena Ashford is worth what we are paying for her presence here." "How?" Garrett asked pragmatically. 60 days is not much time." "Then we use every hour," Marcus said, straightening in his chair, feeling the familiar weight of command settling back over him. "Elena has methods that work with trauma. She has already proven that with Adrian. We have 40 veterans in the castle infirmary right now, suffering from combat trauma similar to what Adrian experienced. We put Elena to work with them. We prove that her value extends beyond one child to the entire fighting force. And if it does not work? Roderick asked quietly. Then in 60 days, I will marry Seraphine and send Elena away with enough gold to live comfortably for the rest of her life, Marcus said. And I will spend the rest of mine knowing that I tried and failed to find a third option between personal happiness and strategic necessity. But first, he added, standing and moving toward the door, I am going to go hold my son and remember why any of this matters at all. He found them in Elena's quarters, a sitting room that connected to her bedroom and had large windows overlooking the gardens. Adrian was on the floor building elaborate structures with wooden blocks, while Elena sat nearby reading from a small leather-bound journal, making notes in careful script. She looked up as Marcus entered, her expression immediately worried. Your Majesty, I heard about Greystone. I am so terribly sorry for the loss. If there is anything I can do to help, please tell me. Marcus knelt beside Adrian, who immediately abandoned his blocks to hug his father with uncomplicated affection. Over his son's head, Marcus met Elena's eyes. There is something you can do, he said. Something that might prove your value to the council and justify the choice I made in appointing you. But it will be difficult work, and it will mean facing things that may be painful for you given your own history. Elena closed her journal and set it aside, giving him her full attention. What do you need from me, Your Majesty? I need you to teach your methods to others, Marcus said. I need you to work with the veterans in our infirmary, the ones suffering from combat trauma similar to what Adrian experienced. I need you to prove that what you did for my son can be done for my soldiers. Can you do that? Elena was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. I can try, she said finally. I do not know if my father's techniques will work for everyone. They are not magic, just careful attention and patience and understanding. But if you think it might help, then yes, I will do everything in my power to serve those men. You understand what is at stake? Marcus asked. If this fails, if the council decides you have not proven your worth in 60 days, I will have to send you away. I will have to marry Seraphine and secure the alliances her betrothal would bring. I need you to know that before you agree to this. Elena's smile was sad but steady. I understand, Your Majesty, and I accept the terms. 60 days to prove that kindness and patience are worth as much as swords and strategies. It seems a fair challenge. Adrian looked between them, sensing the serious adult conversation happening above his head. Mama stays? He asked, his small voice worried. Mama does not leave like Mother did? Mama will stay as long as she can, Elena said gently, gathering the child into her arms. And no matter what happens, I will never leave without saying goodbye. That is a promise I can make and keep. Marcus watched them together and felt the crack in his chest widen further. He was either making the best decision of his life or the worst. Time would tell which. But for now, he had 60 days to prove that sometimes the right choice is not the strategic one, but the human one. And outside the palace walls, in the ruins of Greystone, 127 funeral pyres burned against the evening sky, each one a reminder that command is not glory but burden, and that every choice a king makes is paid for in someone else's blood. The infirmary occupied the eastern wing of the palace, far enough from the royal quarters that the screams would not disturb delicate sensibilities, close enough that the king could visit when duty demanded he witness the cost of his commands. 43 men occupied the long rows of beds, each one carrying wounds that did not show on flesh but ran deeper than any sword cut. Elena stood in the doorway with Marcus beside her, looking at the broken soldiers who represented her challenge and perhaps her salvation. Some lay motionless, staring at ceilings they did not see. Others paced like caged animals, unable to rest, unable to settle. One man in the corner rocked back and forth humming a marching song that had probably once kept time with boots on stone, but now just marked the rhythm of his fractured mind. This is what war leaves behind when the fighting stops, Marcus said quietly. The men who survive the battlefield but cannot escape it. We give them beds and food and tell them to heal, but healing requires tools we do not possess. Elena moved into the room, her steps careful and measured. Several soldiers tracked her movement with the hyper-awareness of men who had learned that inattention kills. She recognized that look. Her father had worn it every day for years, that constant scanning for threats that existed only in memory. A man in his late 20s sat on the edge of his bed cleaning a knife that was already spotless. the repetitive motion clearly soothing something in him that words could not reach. His left hand trembled slightly with each stroke of the whetstone, but his eyes remained fixed on the blade with absolute focus. Elena approached him slowly, making sure he saw her coming, making no sudden movements. The techniques her father's medics had taught her were simple but essential. Never surprise a traumatized soldier. Always approach from the front. Keep your hands visible. Speak calmly and give them space to retreat if they need it. "What is your name?" she asked, keeping her voice low and even. The soldier looked up, his eyes sharp and assessing despite the exhaustion lining his face. "Sergeant Matthias Kane," he said. "Who are you to be asking?" "I am Elena Ashford," she said simply. "I am here to see if I can help." Matthias laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Help? Lady, unless you can make me stop seeing my brothers die every time I close my eyes, unless you can make my hands stop shaking when I hear loud noises, unless you can give me back the ability to sleep more than 2 hours without nightmares, you cannot help me. No one can." "My father had nightmares every night for 3 years after he came home from the border wars," Elena said. "He would wake screaming, convinced enemies were in the room. He could not bear to be touched unexpectedly. He startled at every sudden sound. The healers told him to forget, to move forward, to be grateful he survived. None of it helped. She knelt so she was at eye level with him, not looming, not demanding. But his medics, the ones who had fought beside him and carried the same wounds, they taught him something different. They taught him that what he was experiencing was not weakness or madness. It was his mind trying to protect him from threats it believed still existed. And once he understood that, once he stopped fighting against his own protective instincts and learned to work with them instead, things began to change. Matthias studied her for a long moment. "Your father, did he heal completely?" Elena's smile was sad and honest. "No. He carried scars until the day he died. But he learned to live with them. He learned techniques that made the nightmares less frequent, the startle responses less severe. He learned to recognize when his mind was showing him the past instead of the present, and how to bring himself back. It was not a cure, but it was better than the hell he had been living in." "And you think you can teach us these techniques?" "I can try," Elena said, "if you are willing to let me." Matthias looked around at his fellow soldiers, men who had fought beside him and who now suffered beside him. "What do we have to lose? Better to try something new than lie here waiting to go mad." Over the next week, Elena worked with the soldiers 12 hours a day, applying the methods she had learned caring for her father and adapted for Adrian. She started with the basics: breathing techniques to calm panic responses, grounding exercises to pull minds back from the past into the present, simple routines that provided structure and predictability in days that felt chaotic and dangerous. The work was exhausting and often heartbreaking. Some men responded quickly, grateful for any tool that gave them control over their symptoms. Others resisted, convinced that accepting help meant admitting weakness. Elena learned to recognize the difference between a man who needed pushing and a man who needed space. Marcus visited often, watching as Elena moved among the soldiers with the same patient gentleness she showed Adrian. She never flinched from their anger or their pain. She sat with men who wept. She talked down those who raged. She held steady when they broke and celebrated quietly when they healed. Healer Thomas Gray worked alongside her, his trained medical eye recognizing the value in her unconventional methods. He began documenting everything, creating protocols that could be taught to others, building structure around Elena's instinctive understanding. "She is recovering your fighting force," Thomas told Marcus after the first week. 6 men have shown enough improvement to return to light duty. Another 12 are progressing well. The ones who were here longest, the chronic cases we thought were beyond help, they are responding to her methods better than anything we have tried in years. Marcus felt something like hope beginning to build in his chest. Perhaps Elena truly could prove her worth to the council. Perhaps the 60 days would be enough to show that her value extended beyond his personal household. But on the 8th day, 2 things happened that would change everything. The first was expected. The messenger arrived during morning drills, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding, his face grim with the kind of news that turns stomachs to stone. Marcus was in the training yard working through sword forms with Roderick when the man approached and dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty, Valdris forces have crossed the border in strength, 3,000 troops moving toward Fort Raven. The garrison there numbers only 800. Commander requests immediate reinforcement." Marcus felt the familiar cold clarity of combat planning settle over him. Fort Raven was a critical position, controlling the pass that led to the Heartland. If it fell, Valdris would have a clear route to the capital itself. "Send word to mobilize the 2nd and 4th Legions," he ordered. 2,000 men, full battle kit, ready to march by dawn. I will lead them personally. The messenger hesitated. "Your Majesty, there is more. The civilians in Fort Raven and the surrounding villages, they are evacuating south. Refugees will be flooding the roads within hours. Then send the supply corps ahead of the legions to establish waypoints and aid stations," Marcus said. "And get me Commander Pike and Captain Stone immediately. We have planning to do." The second thing was unexpected and far more troubling. An hour after the Valdris news arrived, Lord Castor appeared at Marcus's study with 3 people in tow. A middle-aged man and woman, both with the worn hands of manual laborers, and a young girl of perhaps 10 years, thin and pale. "Your Majesty," Castor said grimly, "may I present Henrik and Marta Thorne, grain merchants from the eastern provinces, and their daughter Elise." Marcus recognized trouble when he saw it. "What is this about, Lord Castor?" "It is about the consequences of Lady Elena's reforms," Castor said. "Specifically, the grain distribution changes she proposed and you approved 2 weeks ago. The reforms were designed to prevent hoarding and price manipulation," Marcus said carefully, "to ensure that grain reaches those who need it, rather than being stockpiled by wealthy merchants for profit." Castor nodded. "A noble goal, Your Majesty, but Henrik here can explain the actual results better than I can." The man stepped forward, his weathered face showing exhaustion and something close to desperation. "Your Majesty, I am not a wealthy merchant. I own 2 grain storage facilities in the eastern provinces. My family has operated them for 4 generations. We buy grain from local farmers when the harvest is good, store it properly through winter, and sell it in the lean months when fresh crops are not available." He paused, choosing words carefully. "The new regulations you approved, they limit how much grain we can store and mandate distribution at prices below what we paid to buy and store it. They are designed to stop wealthy nobles from hoarding. I understand that. But we are not wealthy nobles. We are working people trying to earn an honest living." Marcus felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. "Continue." 2 weeks ago I had to lay off 15 workers because I can no longer afford to pay them under the new pricing structure," Henrik said. "These were people from my village, people I have known my whole life, people who depend on those wages to feed their families. Last week I had to close one of my storage facilities completely because I cannot afford to maintain it if I'm forced to sell at a loss." "And that facility," Castor added quietly, "stored grain for 3 surrounding villages during lean months. Those villages now have no local food reserve. If the harvest fails next season, they will have nothing." Marta, the woman, spoke for the first time, her voice shaking slightly. "Our daughter Elise has a lung condition. We have been saving for years to afford the treatments from the capital healers. But with our income cut in half, we cannot afford them anymore. She gets weaker every month." Marcus looked at the pale child and saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the slight wheeze in her breathing. He had made countless hard decisions in his career, but this one felt particularly cruel because it was unintentional. The reforms were meant to help people like this family, not hurt them. "I did not know," he said quietly. "This was not the intended outcome." "I believe that, Your Majesty," Henrik said. "But intentions do not feed my workers or heal my daughter. The road to harm is often paved with good intentions applied without full understanding of consequences." "What would you have me do?" Marcus asked. The hoarding was real. Nobles were manipulating grain prices, letting poor people starve while they profited. That had to stop. "It did need to stop," Henrik agreed. "But perhaps the solution was not to ban all grain storage above a certain limit, but to differentiate between working merchants like myself and wealthy nobles stockpiling for profit. Perhaps the solution was to set fair prices that allow honest merchants to stay in business while preventing price gouging. Perhaps the solution was more nuanced than the broad regulation that was passed." Lord Castor looked at Marcus meaningfully. "This is not the only family affected, Your Majesty. I have received 17 similar petitions from the eastern provinces alone. Small merchants, family operations, people who are not wealthy but who performed a legitimate economic function. Elena's reforms are helping some people, yes, but they are also destroying livelihoods of others who were not the intended targets." Marcus felt the weight of command pressing down harder. "How many workers have been laid off total?" "At least 200 that I know of," Castor said. "Possibly more. and 3 villages have lost their food reserves entirely. He paused, then delivered the final blow. Your Majesty, I supported your decision to elevate Elena. I voted in favor of giving her the 60 days to prove her worth. But I must tell you honestly that if these reforms continue to harm innocent families, I will withdraw that support. Good intentions are not enough when the results are suffering. After they left, Marcus sat alone in his study staring at the reform documents Elena had helped draft. They looked so reasonable on paper. Prevent hoarding, ensure fair distribution, protect the vulnerable. But somewhere between policy and implementation, something had gone wrong. The regulations had been too broad, too blunt an instrument for a complex problem. Roderick found him there an hour later, still sitting, still staring. You heard about the Thorne family? I just met them, Marcus said. Along with the reality that good intentions can cause harm when applied without full understanding of consequences. Elena meant well, Roderick offered. I know, Marcus said. But meaning well does not feed laid-off workers or heal sick children. I approved these reforms without thinking through all the implications. I was so focused on proving Elena's value that I did not scrutinize her proposals carefully enough. What will you do? What the messenger did not say, what Marcus learned only later that evening as he reviewed intelligence reports, was that Elena had already left. She had been in the infirmary when news of the Valdris advance reached the soldiers. She had seen the fear in their eyes, the guilt that they were safe in beds while their brothers marched to battle, and she had made a decision that Marcus would have forbidden had he known she was making it. Elena packed a field medic kit, borrowed a cloak that hid her Omega status, and joined the supply convoy that was leaving at midnight to establish aid stations along the evacuation route. She left a note for Marcus, brief and to the point. You need soldiers, not nursemaids. I can serve better at the front. Forgive me for not asking permission. I knew you would say no. Marcus did not find the note until morning when he went to tell Elena about the Thorne family and discuss revisions to the grain reforms. He stood in her empty quarters holding the paper and feeling fury and terror war for dominance in his chest. She went to the front, he said to Roderick, who had accompanied him. She put herself in a war zone without guards, without protection, without even telling anyone who she was. Roderick's expression was carefully neutral. The convoy left 8 hours ago. They will have reached the first refugee waypoint by now. Even if we sent riders, we could not recall her before the supply train reaches Fort Raven itself. Marcus crumpled the note in his fist. When this is over, when I have her back safely, I am going to lock her in her quarters and post guards at every window. Will you? Roderick asked mildly. Because it seems to me she just did exactly what you would have done in her position. She saw where she could serve and she went, regardless of personal risk. That is what soldiers do, Marcus. That is what leaders do. She is not a soldier, Marcus growled. She is a civilian Omega with no combat training walking directly into a battlefield. She is the woman who went to Fort Raven because she felt responsible for the men dying there, Roderick said quietly. She heard the soldiers talking in the infirmary. She knows they blame her presence for Seraphine's withdrawal of support. She knows about the 127 dead at Greystone. She went north to earn those deaths, Marcus, to prove she is worth the blood price you paid to keep her. And perhaps to prove to herself that her reforms, however well-intentioned, have not made her blind to the real costs her presence creates. Marcus closed his eyes and fought for the calm he needed to think tactically instead of emotionally. Is the convoy protected? 20 guards, Roderick confirmed, standard escort for supply runs. But if Valdris scouts find them before they reach Fort Raven, 20 guards will not be enough against determined attackers. Then we march faster, Marcus said. We reach Fort Raven before Valdris can fully invest the position, we reinforce the garrison, and we make damn sure Elena Ashford survives long enough for me to tell her exactly how monumentally stupid this decision was. And when we return, we fix the grain reforms before more families like the Thorns are destroyed by policies meant to help them. The 2nd and 4th Legions marched north under a gray sky that promised rain. 2,000 men moving with the disciplined speed of veterans who knew that delay cost lives. Marcus rode at the front with his senior officers, Roderick on his right, Garrett on his left, both men maintaining the professional silence that meant they were thinking tactically rather than filling air with useless words. They made the first waypoint by nightfall and found it already processing refugees. Families with whatever they could carry, children crying, elderly struggling with the pace of forced evacuation. The Supply Corps had established a basic camp with food distribution and medical triage, but the sheer volume of people was overwhelming the resources. Marcus dismounted and moved through the camp, offering what reassurance he could while his mind calculated numbers and supplies and the terrible mathematics of triage. A young medic approached, exhausted and grateful. "Your Majesty, thank the gods you are here. We are running low on bandages and medicine. The fighting has not even started yet, but we already have injuries from the evacuation itself. Twisted ankles, exhaustion, children with fever." "Where is your supply master?" Marcus asked. The medic pointed to a tent near the center of camp. "A woman, Your Majesty. She arrived with the convoy from the capital. She has been organizing everything, setting up protocols, training our people. Without her, we would be in chaos." Marcus felt his heart stop. He moved toward the tent with Roderick matching his stride, both knowing what they would find before they arrived. Elena was kneeling beside an elderly man, wrapping his ankle with practiced efficiency while giving instructions to two younger medics standing nearby. Her hair was tied back in a simple braid, her borrowed cloak dusty from the road, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had done this work before and knew its rhythms. She looked up as Marcus's shadow fell across her, and he watched understanding and apprehension cross her face in quick succession. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, finishing the bandage before standing. "I can explain." "You will explain," Marcus agreed, his voice deadly calm, "but not here, with me, now." He led her away from the tent to a spot at the edge of camp where they could speak without an audience. Roderick positioned himself far enough away to give them privacy, but close enough to intervene if the king's fury got the better of his judgment. "What were you thinking?" Marcus demanded, all his fear and rage boiling over into words that came out harsher than he intended. "You walked into a war zone without guards, without telling anyone, without any thought for your own safety. Do you have any idea what could have happened to you?" Elena stood straight despite her obvious exhaustion, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that only increased his frustration. "I was thinking that soldiers are dying because you chose me over strategic alliances. I was thinking that 127 men at Greystone paid with their lives for my position at court. I was thinking that I have skills that can help here, training from my father's medics, knowledge of trauma care that your own healers lack." She paused, and Marcus saw something raw and painful in her expression. "And I was thinking about the Thorne family. You know about them?" "Word travels fast in a palace," Elena said quietly. "I heard that my grain reforms have destroyed their livelihood and endangered their daughter's life. I heard that my well-intentioned policies have cost 200 people their jobs and left 3 villages without food reserves. I came here because those men deserved better than my guilt, but also because I needed to do something right after causing so much unintentional harm." "That is not your choice to make," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "Your safety is my responsibility. Your life is valuable." "My life is only valuable if I use it for something that matters," Elena countered. "You told me I had 60 days to prove my worth. How can I prove anything hiding behind palace walls while men fight and die? How can I claim to serve the kingdom when my policies hurt innocent families? Let me serve, Marcus. Let me earn the cost you paid to keep me, and let me learn from my mistakes by seeing their consequences firsthand." "By getting yourself killed? By putting yourself in danger that you are completely unprepared to handle?" "I am more prepared than you think," Elena said quietly. "My father was a soldier. I grew up in military camps and field hospitals. I know how to triage wounds, how to organize supply distribution, how to keep people calm under pressure. These are not theoretical skills for me. I learned them by necessity, watching my father's unit care for their wounded when proper medics were unavailable." Marcus wanted to order her back to the capital, wanted to assign a full guard detail and remove her from danger immediately. But Roderick's words echoed in his mind. She did exactly what you would have done, and the truth was, she was right. She did have skills that were valuable here, techniques that could save lives and improve outcomes. He took a breath and forced himself to think like a commander instead of a frightened man who had already lost one person he cared about to violence. "If I allow you to stay, you will follow orders. You will not take unnecessary risks. You will accept a guard detail. And when this is over, we are having a very long conversation about appropriate decision-making and chain of command. We are also having a very long conversation about the grain reforms and how to fix the unintended harm they have caused." Elena's relief was visible. "I accept all those conditions, Your Majesty." "And you will call me Marcus when we are alone," he added, surprising himself with the request. "I am tired of the formality when it is just us." Her smile was small and genuine. "Then I accept that condition too, Marcus." They worked through the night processing refugees and organizing the supply distribution. Elena moved through the camp with quiet efficiency, solving problems before they became crises, training inexperienced medics in techniques that maximized their effectiveness. Marcus watched her work and understood with sudden clarity that this was who she was meant to be. Not hiding in shadows, not bowing and scraping, but here in the chaos serving people who needed her particular skills. By dawn, the refugees had been fed and sheltered and sent south with enough supplies to reach the next waypoint. The legions prepared to march the final stretch to Fort Raven, and Elena prepared to march with them despite every protective instinct in Marcus screaming at him to send her back. Roderick approached as Marcus was checking his armor. "You are really letting her come with us to an active siege?" "I am really trying to trust that she knows what she is doing," Marcus said, and failing spectacularly at maintaining any kind of professional detachment. "You care about her," Roderick observed. "This is not just about Adrian anymore. You care about Elena herself." Marcus did not deny it. "I care about her courage. I care about her competence. I care about the fact that she walked into danger to serve men she has never met because she felt responsible for their suffering. Those are qualities I value in anyone, Roderick. The fact that she happens to be a beautiful Omega whose presence makes me feel something other than grief for the first time in 6 months is both irrelevant and completely overwhelming." "So what are you going to do about it?" "Survive the next few days," Marcus said grimly. "Keep her alive. Win this battle. Fix the reforms that hurt the Thorne family and others like them. Then perhaps I will have the luxury of figuring out what I feel and whether it matters." They went to bed holding each other, two people who had found unexpected partnership in the aftermath of loss and built something beautiful from the broken pieces they had each carried. And in the garden below their windows, the seeds Adrian had scattered that evening were already being discovered by early rising birds who would return tomorrow and the next day and every day after, drawn by the reliable kindness of humans who remembered that small acts of care create ripples that extend far beyond their origin. Fort Raven sat atop a rocky prominence overlooking the northern pass, its walls ancient stone reinforced with modern engineering. 800 defenders held those walls, a mix of regular garrison troops and local militia who had nowhere else to go. The Valdris force besieging them numbered 3,000 at last count, professional soldiers under the command of High Lord Cassius Valdor, a man Marcus had fought against and respected for his tactical brilliance and honor. The situation was dire, but not hopeless. Marcus's 2,000 reinforcements changed the numbers from overwhelming to merely difficult. But the real challenge was breaking the siege without catastrophic casualties on both sides. Marcus established his command post in the valley below the fort, close enough to coordinate with the garrison, but far enough to maintain tactical flexibility. Elena and the medical corps set up their triage station in a reinforced position behind the main lines, protected but accessible. The first assault came at dawn 2 days after their arrival. Valdris forces testing the defenses, probing for weak points, forcing Marcus to reveal his troop positions. The fighting was brutal and efficient, professional soldiers doing ugly work with practiced skill. Marcus's forces held, but the cost was immediate and harsh. 40 men wounded in the first hour, 8 dead by midday. Elena worked in the field hospital with blood on her hands and exhaustion in her eyes. She moved between wounded men offering medical care and the kind of calm presence that steadied soldiers who were trying not to scream. Marcus saw her holding a young soldier's hand while Thomas Gray amputated his mangled leg, saw her whispering something that kept the boy focused on her face instead of the saw cutting through bone. "This is what you wanted to protect her from," Garrett said, standing beside Marcus watching the medical tent. "This ugliness, this is what she chose," Marcus corrected. "And she was right to choose it. Look at those men. They are terrified and in pain, but she is keeping them steady. That is worth more than any amount of well-meaning protection." The siege settled into a rhythm of skirmishes and countermoves, each side testing the other, looking for advantage without committing to a full-scale assault that would cost thousands. Marcus coordinated with the garrison commander, a grizzled veteran named Colonel Thane who had held impossible positions before and knew how to make limited resources stretch. On the 5th day, something changed. A Valdris messenger approached under flag of truce, requesting parley. Marcus agreed, meeting High Lord Cassius in the neutral ground between the armies with Roderick and Garrett flanking him and a dozen guards maintaining careful watch. Cassius was a man in his late 50s, gray-haired and scarred, with the eyes of someone who had seen too many battles and buried too many soldiers. He greeted Marcus with the respect of one professional warrior to another. "King Marcus, you have reinforced Fort Raven admirably. This position is now defensible enough that taking it would cost me more than it is worth." "Then withdraw," Marcus suggested. "Return to your borders and we can discuss terms that do not require more bloodshed." "I would be willing to consider that," Cassius said. "But I am curious about something first. I have been watching your camp. You have an Omega working in your medical tents, treating wounded without discrimination between friend and foe. My own soldiers who were captured and treated speak of her with reverence. Who is she?" Marcus felt protective instinct rise sharp and immediate. "She is under my personal protection. That is all you need to know." Cassius smiled slightly. "I am not asking for tactical intelligence, Marcus. I am asking because I saw something yesterday that I have not seen in 30 years of warfare. Your Omega was treating one of my wounded lieutenants when artillery fire came close to the medical tent. Your guards rushed to protect her. She ordered them to cover the wounded instead, said their lives were more valuable than hers, and kept working while shells fell 50 yards away." "What is your point, Cassius?" "My point is that any Omega who shows that kind of courage under fire deserves to be known by name and deed, not hidden as if her presence is something to be ashamed of." Marcus considered carefully. "Her name is Elena Ashford. She is companion to my son and heir. And yes, before you ask, she is the reason I rejected the alliance marriage your network of informants undoubtedly told you about." Cassius nodded slowly. "That explains much. The question is, was she worth it? Worth the political cost, the military complications, the soldiers who died at Greystone?" "Ask me again when this is over," Marcus said, "when I know whether we all survive the consequences of my choices." "Fair enough," Cassius agreed. "But I will tell you this, King Marcus. I came north intending to test your defenses and extract concessions through military pressure. I brought 3,000 troops ready to fight and bleed for territorial advantage. But watching your Omega treat my wounded with the same care she gives your own, watching her risk her life for men who are her enemies in this conflict, has made me reconsider what honor demands." He paused, and Marcus waited, sensing this was heading somewhere unexpected. "I propose a negotiated settlement," Cassius said. "Not an alliance marriage, not territorial concessions, but a genuine peace built on mutual interest rather than hostage exchanges disguised as betrothals. You have something I need. My veterans return from campaigns shattered, unable to function, draining resources and breaking families. Your Omega has methods that work. I saw the reports from your palace infirmary. 60% recovery rate among chronic cases thought untreatable. You want Elena to treat your soldiers? I want your kingdom to share the protocols she has developed," Cassius clarified. "Train my medics in her techniques. Establish a program that helps soldiers on both sides of this border process their trauma so they can return to productive lives. That is worth more to me than any amount of territory, Marcus. Healthy soldiers are better than broken ones, regardless of politics." Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. "And in exchange?" "In exchange, I withdraw my forces from this siege, establish a formal peace treaty with trade provisions and border recognition, and stop testing your defenses every time I think you look vulnerable. Your Omega has shown me that strength comes in many forms. The willingness to heal enemies is a kind of power I respect more than the ability to kill them." Marcus looked back toward his camp, where Elena was undoubtedly still working, still serving, still proving with every action that her value transcended politics and bloodlines. "I will need to discuss this with my council. But yes, I believe we can negotiate those terms. One more thing," Cassius added. "When you return to your capital and your council questions whether Elena was worth the cost, you tell them that High Lord Cassius Valdor of the Northern Reaches says she is worth 10 times what you paid. Any woman who treats enemies with compassion while under fire is worth her weight in gold and loyalty both. That is my assessment as a man who has fought more battles than I can count. Her courage is not the soft kind that flinches from hard truths. It is the hardest courage there is, the courage to care when it would be easier to hate." The parley ended with preliminary agreements and the promise of formal negotiations once both forces withdrew to safer positions. Marcus returned to camp and found Elena exactly where he expected her, in the medical tent working on a soldier's shrapnel wounds with focused concentration. She looked up as he entered, her hands steady despite obvious exhaustion. "Is the fighting over?" "For now," Marcus confirmed. "Cassius is withdrawing. We have the framework of a peace treaty." Elena's relief was visible. "Thank the gods. I am so tired of sewing men back together only to watch them march back into danger." "You made an impression on him," Marcus said. "On Cassius. He spoke of you with respect bordering on admiration. He called your courage the hardest kind there is." Elena's laugh was short and exhausted. "I am not brave, Marcus. I am terrified every moment of every day here. I just cannot let that terror stop me from doing what needs to be done." "That is exactly what courage is," Marcus said gently. "Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let it dictate your actions." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that watching her work these past days had changed something fundamental in how he saw the world and his place in it. But the words were too large and too important to speak in a tent full of wounded soldiers and listening medics. "Come," he said instead. "You need rest. Thomas and the others can manage for a few hours while you sleep." Elena looked around at the remaining wounded, clearly reluctant to leave her post. "They need me. They need you functional, which you will not be if you collapse from exhaustion. That is an order, Elena, from your king and your friend. Go rest." She finally nodded and allowed him to escort her to the command tent where a cot had been set up for his own use. He gave it to her without hesitation, watching as she sank onto it with a groan of relief. "Thank you," she murmured, already half asleep, "for trusting me enough to let me serve here." Marcus pulled a blanket over her and stepped back, letting her rest. "Thank you for being brave enough to come even when I would have forbidden it. You were right to be here. I was wrong to want you safe more than I wanted you free to choose your own service." But Elena was already asleep, exhausted beyond the point of hearing his confession. The return to the capital took 3 days of careful marching with wounded in carts and soldiers on foot. Elena rode in the medical wagon, still treating injuries and monitoring recovery even as they traveled. The men she had cared for at Fort Raven treated her with a reverence that transcended her official position. To them, she was not a servant elevated above her station. She was the Omega who had held their hands while they screamed, who had worked without rest to save their lives, who had treated them as human beings worthy of dignity even in their suffering. Sergeant Matthias Kane, recovered enough from his trauma to return to active duty, walked beside the wagon for part of the journey. Marcus overheard their conversation as he rode past. "We were wrong about you, Lady Elena," Matthias said quietly. "In the infirmary before Fort Raven, we thought you were just some servant using the king's favor for personal gain. We blamed you for Greystone, for the men who died." "I know," Elena said gently. "I heard the whispers. I understood the resentment. But you came anyway. You walked into a war zone to prove yourself to men who hated you. That takes a kind of strength most of us will never have." "I came because those men deserved better than my guilt," Elena corrected. "They deserved someone who would serve them as hard as I served my own comfort. And I came because I needed to understand the full consequences of my actions, including the policies I helped create that hurt families like the Thorns. I owed all of you that much at minimum." Matthias was quiet for a moment. "You heard about the grain reforms then, about the merchants who were hurt." "I heard," Elena said softly. "And when we return to the capital, fixing that harm will be my first priority. Good intentions are not enough when the results are suffering. I need to learn to think through consequences more carefully, to understand that policy affects real people in complex ways I might not anticipate." "You are learning what every good leader learns eventually," Matthias said, "that there are no perfect solutions, only choices with different costs, and the responsibility to minimize harm while maximizing good." Marcus felt something warm and painful expand in his chest. This was what Elena had earned at Fort Raven. Not tolerance or acceptance, but genuine respect from men who understood exactly what her presence had cost and what her service had meant. And she was humble enough to admit her mistakes and committed enough to fix them. The capital came into view on the afternoon of the 3rd day, its walls and towers rising from the landscape like promises of safety and civilization. Marcus sent riders ahead to inform the council of their return and the treaty negotiations that would follow. He also sent specific instructions that quarters should be prepared for the Valdris delegation and that Elena should be treated with the full honors of her position. They entered the city to the sound of bells ringing victory and relief. Citizens lined the streets to welcome their soldiers home, to celebrate survival and peace, to see the king who had defended them once again. But Marcus noted with satisfaction that many of the cheers were for Elena, word of her service having spread through the ranks and into the broader population. The council convened that evening an emergency session to hear Marcus's report on the Fort Raven campaign and the proposed treaty with Valdris. High Lord Ashmore presided with his usual grave dignity, but Marcus could see calculation behind the old man's eyes. The political landscape had shifted significantly in the past weeks. "Your Majesty," Ashmore began formally, "the Council acknowledges your successful defense of Fort Raven and commends the courage of our soldiers. We understand negotiations with High Lord Cassius are underway. What are the proposed terms?" Marcus outlined the agreement: peace treaty with border recognition, trade provisions, and most significantly, the sharing of trauma treatment protocols developed by Elena. In exchange, Valdris would cease military pressure, establish formal diplomatic relations, and contribute resources to a joint program serving veterans on both sides of the border. "This is unprecedented," Ashmore said slowly. "A treaty built on medical cooperation rather than territorial or marriage alliances." "It is also practical," Marcus countered. "Cassius recognized that healthy soldiers serve better than broken ones. Elena's methods offer tangible value that transcends politics. He has agreed to peace terms specifically to access that value. I submit that this proves her worth extends far beyond my personal household." There was murmuring around the council table. Several members looked thoughtful. Others remained skeptical. Before anyone could speak further, Lord Castor rose. "Your Majesty, I must address another matter related to Lady Elena's contributions, the grain distribution reforms." Marcus tensed, but nodded for Castor to continue. "3 weeks ago I brought the Thorne family to you," Castor said. "They represented dozens of working merchants whose livelihoods were destroyed by well-intentioned but poorly targeted regulations. I told you then that I would withdraw my support for Lady Elena if these harms continued." He paused, looking around the council chamber. "This afternoon I received a message from Lady Elena, sent from Fort Raven 2 days ago. She acknowledged the harm her reforms caused, took full responsibility for failing to anticipate consequences, and proposed detailed revisions to the regulations that would prevent hoarding while protecting legitimate merchants." Castor held up a document. "Her proposals differentiate between wealthy nobles stockpiling for profit and working merchants providing essential storage services. They set fair prices that prevent price gouging while allowing honest merchants to stay in business. They establish a hardship fund to help families like the Thornes who were harmed by the original implementation." He set the document on the table. "I have reviewed these revisions with 3 economists and 4 merchant representatives. They are sound. They accomplish the original goals while avoiding the unintended harm." Lady Elena wrote these proposals while working 18-hour days in a battlefield hospital, surrounded by wounded soldiers and incoming artillery. Castor looked directly at Marcus. "That is leadership, Your Majesty. The ability to recognize mistakes, take responsibility for them, and work to fix them even while serving in other capacities. The ability to balance multiple priorities without losing sight of those you have harmed. I withdraw my objection to Lady Elena's position. More than that, I vote in favor of her continued elevation and expanded authority to implement these revised reforms." Marcus felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by deep respect for Elena's foresight and commitment. She had not waited for criticism or mandate. She had seen the harm and moved to fix it while simultaneously serving at Fort Raven. "The question remains," High Lord Ashmore said carefully. "We have lost over 400 men in the conflicts that arose from your decision to elevate Elena Ashford. Greystone, Fort Raven, the skirmishes in between. Can any peace treaty or policy reform truly balance that cost?" Before Marcus could answer, the chamber doors opened, and Sergeant Matthias Kane entered, still in his travel-stained uniform, moving with the confidence of a man who had earned the right to speak truth to power. "Forgive the interruption, my lords," Matthias said, bowing to the council, "but I could not let that question stand unanswered. I am one of the men who was in the palace infirmary when Lady Elena began her work. I am also one of the men who fought at Fort Raven under her care." He moved to the center of the circle so all could see him clearly. 400 men died in these conflicts, that is true, but I ask you to consider how many men were saved by Lady Elena's presence. At Fort Raven alone, she treated over 200 casualties. Without her organizational skills and medical training, our survival rate would have been perhaps 50%. She pushed it to 70%. That is 40 additional men who came home to their families because she was there. Matthias paused, letting the numbers sink in. In the infirmary, she recovered 60% of chronic trauma cases thought untreatable. That is 24 men returned to active duty who would have been permanently disabled. Add the men she will save through the protocols she has developed, the training she can provide to other medics, the long-term impact of making trauma treatment effective instead of theatrical, and the mathematics change considerably. He looked directly at Ashmore. "You ask if peace with Valdris balances the cost of 400 lives. I ask if you understand that without Lady Elena's methods, we would have lost 800 at Fort Raven instead of the 300 we did lose. She has already saved more lives than her elevation cost, and if we implement her programs kingdom-wide as the treaty proposes, she will save thousands more. That is not sentiment speaking, my lords. That is mathematics." The council was silent. Finally, Ashmore spoke, his voice thoughtful rather than challenging. "You make a compelling argument, Sergeant, and your testimony regarding her character and leadership is noted. Does anyone else wish to speak before we vote?" Lady Seraphine Blackwood entered at that moment, her presence as composed and commanding as always. She had been notably absent from court since Marcus's rejection of her marriage proposal, but she had sent formal congratulations on the Fort Raven victory and requested this audience. "Your Majesty," she addressed Marcus with perfect courtesy. "High Lord Ashmore, honored council members, I come to add my voice to this discussion, though perhaps from an unexpected direction." She moved to stand where Matthias had stood, owning the space with natural authority. "When King Marcus elevated Elena Ashford over 47 noble candidates, including myself, I was insulted and angry. I believed he had chosen sentiment over strategy, personal preference over political necessity. I believed Elena was unworthy of the position she had been given." Seraphine paused, and Marcus saw something in her face he had not expected: humility. "I was wrong," Seraphine continued. "I have spent the past weeks reviewing the reports from Fort Raven, speaking with soldiers who served under her care, consulting with healers who have studied her methods, and examining the revised grain reforms she drafted while under enemy fire. And I have reached an inescapable conclusion. Lady Elena has proven herself in ways I never anticipated and could not have matched." She looked directly at Marcus. "You made the harder choice, Your Majesty. Not the easy political alliance, but the challenging personal commitment. You bet on an unknown servant's potential rather than a known noble's credentials. That took courage I did not credit you with at the time. And Elena justified your faith by serving with a dedication I must respect, even as it highlights my own limitations." Seraphine turned to address the full council. "I withdraw my objection to her elevation. More than that, I offer my house's support for her work. If there are veterans in my territories who need treatment, I will send them to her programs. If she needs resources or personnel to fix the grain reform implementation, I will provide them. This is not charity or politics. This is recognition of genuine value and genuine leadership." She inclined her head to Marcus and left as regally as she had entered, leaving the council in thoughtful silence. Finally, Ashmore spoke, his voice carrying the weight of decision. "The council has heard compelling testimony from multiple sources. We have seen evidence of Lady Elena's service at Fort Raven and her immediate response to policy failures. We have reviewed the proposed treaty with Valdris that arose directly from her presence and actions. It seems we must reconsider our initial assessment." He looked around the circle, noting the subtle nods and agreements. "Therefore, I propose we vote not on whether to remove Lady Elena from her position, but on whether to formally recognize her contributions to the kingdom and authorize the resources needed to expand her trauma treatment programs kingdom-wide and implement her revised grain distribution reforms." The vote was 12 in favor, 4 abstaining, none opposed. Marcus felt tension he had been carrying for weeks finally begin to ease. After the council dispersed, Marcus found Elena in her quarters with Adrian, the child chattering excitedly about the birds he had seen that day and the new words he had learned. She looked up as Marcus entered, her expression questioning. "The council voted to support your work," Marcus said without preamble. "They recognized your service at Fort Raven and your response to the grain reform failures. They authorized expansion of your programs and implementation of your policy revisions. You have proven your worth, Elena. You have more than earned your position here." Elena's smile was tired but genuine. "I am glad. Not for myself, but for the soldiers who will receive care that actually helps them, and for the families like the Thorns who will not be harmed by policies meant to protect them. That is what matters." Adrian tugged on Marcus's hand. "Papa, will Mama stay forever now? The council said yes?" "The council said yes," Marcus confirmed, kneeling to his son's level. "Mama can stay as long as she wants." "Forever and ever?" Adrian pressed. Marcus looked at Elena over his son's head, seeing the woman who had changed everything by refusing to stay invisible, who had walked into war to earn the lives her elevation had cost, who had admitted mistakes and worked to fix them even while serving under fire, who had proven that strength came in forms the kingdom had not known how to recognize. "Forever and ever," Marcus agreed, "if she will have us." Elena's eyes filled with tears she did not let fall. "There is nowhere else I would rather be," she said softly. "No service more important than this." And in that moment, with his son between them and the weight of command temporarily lifted, Marcus let himself hope that perhaps there was room in his life for more than duty and grief. Perhaps there was room for this woman who had shown him that healing was possible, that courage wore many faces, and that sometimes the most strategic choice was the one that followed the heart instead of the ledger. Outside the window, birds called to each other in the gathering dusk, their songs marking the end of one day and the promise of another. And in the garden below, seeds scattered weeks ago by a servant girl who wanted only to help a sad child were beginning to sprout. Small green shoots pushing through earth toward light. The formal proposal came on a quiet morning 3 weeks after their return from Fort Raven. Marcus found Elena in the infirmary reviewing patient notes with healer Thomas, their heads bent together over charts documenting recovery rates and treatment protocols. She looked up as he entered, and the smile that crossed her face was unguarded and warm in a way that made his chest tight. "Walk with me," he said simply. "There is something I need to ask you." They walked to the garden where Adrian had first scattered seeds, and Elena had first shown Marcus what patience and kindness could accomplish. The autumn air was crisp and clear, and the birds that had become such an important part of their story called to each other from the trees. "Elena," Marcus began, then stopped, suddenly uncertain. He had led armies into battle without hesitation, had made life and death decisions that affected thousands, but asking this one question felt more daunting than any command he had ever given. "You are afraid," Elena observed gently. "I can see it in the way you are standing. What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Marcus said. "Everything is actually more right than I expected it could be after Isabella died. And that is what makes this so difficult. I need to ask you something that will change everything between us, and I am terrified of your answer." Elena waited, patient as always, giving him space to find his words. "The council has formally recognized your contributions to the kingdom," Marcus continued. "They have authorized expansion of your programs and acknowledged your value. But there is still the matter of my need for a political alliance, for a queen who can help lead and represent this kingdom. The council will eventually require me to address that need." He took a breath and made himself look directly at her. "I could choose another noble Omega. I could make a strategic marriage that brings military alliances and political advantages. The council would accept that. The kingdom would benefit from it. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that prioritizes policy over personal feeling." Elena's expression remained calm, but Marcus saw her hands tighten slightly on the notebook she still carried. "I understand," she said quietly. "You have responsibilities that extend beyond your personal preferences. I have never expected otherwise." "I am not finished," Marcus said. "I could make that safe strategic choice, or I could ask you to marry me. Not for alliance or advantage, not because the council demands it or tradition requires it, but because over these past months you have shown me what partnership truly means. You have taught me that strength comes in many forms, that leadership is service rather than command, that the hardest courage is the courage to care when it would be easier to close yourself off from pain." He stepped closer to her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes and the way her breath had gone slightly uneven. Elena Ashford, I am asking you to be my queen. Not because I need political advantage, but because I need you. I need your wisdom and your compassion and your absolute refusal to let fear dictate your choices. I need your partnership in raising Adrian and leading this kingdom. I need you beside me not as ornament or obligation, but as equal and companion and the person I trust most in this world. Marcus paused, vulnerable in a way he had not allowed himself to be since Isabella's death. I am offering you a position that will be difficult and demanding and sometimes dangerous. I am offering you scrutiny and criticism and the weight of responsibility that comes with leadership. I am offering you my heart, which is scarred and broken, and still learning how to hope again. The question is whether you want any of that, whether you want me and this life and everything that comes with it. Elena set down her notebook with careful precision, her hands trembling slightly. Then she looked up at Marcus with tears in her eyes and steel in her voice. I want all of it, she said. The difficulty and the danger and the scarred heart that is learning to hope. I want the responsibility and the partnership and the chance to serve beside you. I want to be Adrian's mother, not just in name but in truth. I want to build something with you that matters, something that makes the sacrifices worthwhile and the struggles meaningful. She reached up and touched his face with gentle fingers. I am terrified, Marcus. I am absolutely terrified of being queen, of the expectations and the judgment and the 1,000 ways I might fail. But I am more terrified of walking away from this, of choosing safety over purpose, of letting fear win. So yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will be your queen. Yes to all of it. Marcus pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the pent-up emotion of months spent denying what he felt, all the grief and hope and desperate gratitude that she existed and had chosen him and was willing to take on the impossible task of loving a broken king and his traumatized son. Elena kissed him back with equal intensity, her small frame solid and steady against him, her hands tangled in his hair, her breath mixing with his in the cool autumn air. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. I do not deserve you, he said quietly. You deserve someone who sees your worth and is not afraid to serve beside you, Elena corrected. That is what I offer. Not perfection, but partnership. Not answers, but willingness to search for them together. Not rescue, but the promise that you will never have to carry your burdens alone again. That is more than enough, Marcus said. That is everything. But the path from proposal to marriage was not smooth or simple. The council required formal review of the decision, not to challenge Marcus's choice, but to ensure proper protocols were followed and the political implications understood. High Lord Ashmore convened a special session to discuss the matter, inviting input from all factions and perspectives. Your Majesty, Ashmore began when the council assembled, we acknowledge your intention to marry Lady Elena Ashford. Before we proceed with formal approval and planning, the council must address several concerns regarding precedent and governance. Marcus had expected this. Speak your concerns, High Lord. I will address what I can. The primary concern is precedent, Ashmore said carefully. By elevating a common-born Omega to queen, you are fundamentally changing the relationship between rank and authority in this kingdom. Every noble house will now question whether their daughters have claim to positions they previously could not access. Every common family will see Elena's rise as proof that social mobility is possible. These are not small changes, Your Majesty. They will reshape our entire social structure. Good, Marcus said bluntly. Perhaps our social structure needs reshaping. Perhaps we have been wasting valuable human potential by insisting that worth correlates with birth rather than capability. Elena has proven that a common-born Omega can serve this kingdom as effectively as any noble. If that threatens the established order, then perhaps the established order is overdue for examination. Murmurs ran through the council chamber, some approving, others concerned, all recognizing that this was a pivotal moment in the kingdom's evolution. Before the debate could intensify, the chamber doors opened and Adrian entered, holding Healer Thomas's hand. The child was dressed in his finest clothes, his small face serious and determined. Thomas led him to the center of the council circle and then stepped back, giving Adrian space to speak. High Lord Ashmore, Adrian said, his voice clear despite his obvious nervousness. I am Adrian Theron, heir to this kingdom. I ask permission to address the council. "Permission granted, young lord," Ashmore said gently, his stern face softening slightly at the sight of the child taking on such responsibility. "Speak your mind." Adrian looked around the circle, meeting the eyes of grown men who held his future in their hands. "You are deciding if Mama Elena can marry Papa and be queen. I came to tell you why she should." He took a breath, gathering courage. "When my mother died, I stopped talking. I stopped playing and laughing and being happy. Everyone tried to help me, healers and teachers and nice ladies who wanted to make me feel better. But I could not talk to them because talking hurt too much, and I was too scared." His small hands clenched at his sides. "Then Mama Elena came. She did not try to make me talk. She just sat with me and watched birds and left seeds. She did not need me to be better right away. She just let me be sad and scared, and she was there anyway. That is what helped. Not people trying to fix me, but someone who understood that some things cannot be fixed quickly." Adrian's voice strengthened. "But Mama did something else too. She helped Papa. Papa was sad like me, but he had to be king so he could not show it. He had nightmares every night. I heard him from my room. He would wake up scared and alone, and he thought no one knew. But Mama knew. She taught him the same things she taught me. How to make the bad dreams smaller. How to be okay with being sad sometimes. How to keep going even when it is hard." The council chamber was absolutely silent. Marcus felt his throat tight with emotion he had not expected to feel, certainly not in this public forum. "If Papa could not be a good king because he was too sad," Adrian continued, "then the kingdom would not be safe. Mama made Papa able to be king again. That is important. That is worth more than being born in a fancy house. She made our family work again. She made Papa smile again. She made me able to talk again. If that is not what queens are supposed to do, then I do not understand what queens are for." Adrian looked directly at Ashmore. "High Lord, I know I am young, and maybe you think I do not understand important things. But I understand that Mama Elena saved me and Papa both. And if you say she cannot be queen, then you are saying that saving people is not as important as being born to the right family. That does not seem fair or right to me." He bowed formally, as he had been taught, and then returned to Thomas's side. The healer put a protective hand on the boy's shoulder, his own expression proud and moved. Ashmore was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rougher than usual. "Thank you, young lord. Your testimony is noted and deeply appreciated." He looked around the council circle. "I suspect I am not the only one here who did not know that His Majesty was suffering from his own trauma response. It changes the calculation considerably. If Lady Elena has been serving not just as companion to the heir, but as support to the king himself, then her value to the kingdom extends beyond what we previously understood." Marcus stood. Knowing this moment required honesty, even if it exposed vulnerability, he would have preferred to keep private. "High Lord Ashmore is correct. I have been carrying my own trauma from Isabella's death, from the ambush that took her life and cost us so many good soldiers. I have had nightmares, difficulty concentrating, moments of paralysis when command decisions were required. I believed I was managing it adequately, that my struggles were invisible and therefore irrelevant." He met the eyes of his council members one by one. "I was wrong. My impaired judgment was affecting my leadership in ways I could not see, but others certainly could. Captain Stone and Commander Pike can attest that they have covered for my lapses these past months, made decisions I should have made, carried weight I should have been carrying." Roderick and Garrett both nodded grimly from their positions flanking the council circle. "Elena helped me process what I was experiencing," Marcus continued. "She gave me tools to manage the symptoms and understanding to accept that healing is not weakness. She made me functional again as a king, not perfect, not unmarked by loss, but capable of leading clearly and thinking strategically. That service to the kingdom has been invisible because trauma is invisible, but it is no less real or valuable for being unseen. So when the council considers whether to approve this marriage," Marcus said firmly, "consider not just what Elena has done for my son or for our soldiers, but what she has done for your king's ability to actually lead you. Consider whether a queen who can keep her king functional during crisis is worth more than a queen who brings political alliances but cannot address the fundamental problem of compromised leadership." There was a long silence. Then Lord Castor, who had been one of the strongest voices of opposition, spoke thoughtfully. Your Majesty, I criticized your choice harshly when you first elevated Lady Elena. I believed you were thinking with sentiment rather than strategy. I owe you an apology. You were thinking strategically, just on a longer timeline than I understood. A king who cannot lead clearly is a greater threat to the kingdom than any external enemy. If Lady Elena restored your capacity for command, then she has served us all in ways we did not recognize. Other council members began to speak, offering similar acknowledgments. Even those who remained uncomfortable with the social implications of elevating a common-born Omega could not deny the pragmatic value of what Elena had accomplished. Finally, Ashmore called for a vote. The motion before the council is formal approval of the marriage between King Marcus Theron and Lady Elena Ashford, with Elena to be elevated to queen upon completion of the ceremony. All in favor? 12 hands rose. 4 council members abstained, unwilling to fully endorse the precedent, but also unwilling to oppose a decision that clearly served the kingdom's interests. No hands rose in opposition. The motion passes, Ashmore announced. Lady Elena is approved as queen-elect. Wedding preparations may commence with the council's blessing. Marcus felt relief and triumph surge through him, but Ashmore was not finished. However, the High Lord continued, there is one condition the council requires. This elevation cannot be seen as purely personal or romantic. Lady Elena must demonstrate ongoing value to the kingdom through her service. The trauma treatment program she has pioneered must be formalized and expanded. The protocols must be documented and taught. Her work must become institutional rather than individual, so that it outlasts her personal involvement. That is already underway, Elena said quietly, speaking for the first time in the session. Healer Thomas and I have been documenting everything. We have trained 12 additional medics in the basic protocols. Within 6 months, we will have a formal program that can operate independently of my direct involvement. Excellent, Ashmore said with genuine approval. Then let it be recorded that the council approves this marriage not as indulgence, but as recognition of service and partnership that benefits the entire kingdom. May it prove as successful as it is unprecedented. The wedding planning began immediately, but Elena had specific requirements that surprised the traditional court planners. She did not want an elaborate ceremony in the capital cathedral with thousands of spectators and displays of wealth that would feed the poor for months. She wanted something simpler and more meaningful. I want the ceremony at Fort Raven, she told Marcus as they discussed options. At the memorial you are building for the soldiers who died in these conflicts. I want the people who paid the price for our happiness to be honored as we celebrate. I want the families of the fallen to be invited, to be treated as honored guests rather than forgotten casualties. And I want the ceremony to emphasize service rather than spectacle. Marcus understood immediately. You want to make it clear that this marriage is about partnership in duty, not personal indulgence. I want everyone there to understand that we remember what this cost, Elena said. That we are not celebrating as if those 427 deaths did not matter, but rather committing to make their sacrifice meaningful through how we lead going forward. The wedding was planned for the first day of spring, 3 months after the proposal. The memorial at Fort Raven was completed 2 weeks before the ceremony, a simple stone wall inscribed with every name of every soldier who had died in the conflicts surrounding Elena's elevation. The families were invited as Elena requested, given places of honor, offered resources and support from the crown. High Lord Cassius accepted his invitation and brought a delegation from Valdris, a gesture of respect and commitment to the new peace. He also brought gifts, including ancient medical texts from Valdris archives that documented trauma treatment methods used in previous wars. These are for your queen, Cassius told Marcus when presenting the texts. She has given me tools to help my own soldiers. This is what I can offer in return, knowledge preserved by those who came before and understood that the wounds of war extend beyond the battlefield. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Fort Raven had been transformed from military outpost to ceremonial ground, but the transformation honored its purpose rather than disguised it. The memorial wall stood at the heart of the gathering, a constant reminder of cost and consequence. Elena wore a dress of deep blue, simple in design but rich in fabric, with embroidery that honored both her common origins and her elevated position. Marcus wore his dress uniform, but added a touch that surprised many observers. He wore Isabella's campaign medals on his chest, a public acknowledgement that his first wife's sacrifice and service would not be forgotten or erased by this new beginning. The ceremony itself was brief and focused on vows that emphasized partnership and service. But Marcus added something unexpected. He removed Isabella's combat dagger from his belt, the weapon she had carried into her final battle, and presented it to Elena. "This belonged to my first queen," Marcus said, his voice carrying to every witness. "She was a warrior who served this kingdom with courage and honor. She died protecting others, which is the highest service any soldier can offer. I give you her blade not to replace her, but to honor the continuum of service that you both represent. You fight different battles with different weapons, but you both embody the truth that leadership is sacrifice and strength comes in many forms." Elena accepted the dagger with reverent care. Then she reached into her own belongings and withdrew a worn field medic knife, its handle wrapped in faded leather, its blade marked with the stains of old use. "This was my father's," Elena said, her voice steady despite obvious emotion. "He was a common soldier who served on the border and came home broken by what he experienced. But he survived, and he taught me everything he learned about trauma and healing and the cost of service. I give you his knife to symbolize that our marriage joins not just us as individuals, but our family's legacies of service. Warrior and healer, soldier and medic, both essential, both worthy, both contributing to something larger than ourselves." Marcus took the knife and understood the symbolism immediately. This was not just a wedding, it was a public statement about what kind of kingdom they intended to build. One that valued all forms of service, all types of strength, all the different ways people contributed to the collective good. When the ceremony concluded and they were formally married, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers that echoed off the surrounding mountains. But Elena requested one more moment before they returned to celebration. She approached the memorial wall and placed a wreath of autumn flowers at its base. Then she knelt and spoke words only those closest could hear. "Your sacrifice is not forgotten. Your service is not diminished. We will honor your memory by leading with the same courage you showed. This is our promise to you and to all who serve and suffer in defense of others." Marcus knelt beside her and added his own promise. "You will be remembered not as statistics, but as individuals who mattered. Your families will be supported, your stories will be told, and the kingdom you died defending will be worth your sacrifice because we will make it so." It was this moment, more than the formal ceremony, that defined what their marriage would mean. Not escape from duty, but deeper commitment to it. Not personal happiness at others' expense, but partnership and service that honored those who had paid the price. The celebration that followed was joyous, but not extravagant. Soldiers and civilians mingled freely. Noble families and common families shared tables. Valdris delegation members traded stories with their former enemies, finding common ground in shared experience and mutual respect. Seraphine attended with Commander Garrett at her side, the two having formed an unexpected connection during the treaty negotiations. She approached Elena during the feast with genuine warmth. "You have made an honorable match," Seraphine said, "and you have changed this kingdom in ways I did not think possible. I was wrong to oppose you initially. I hope we can move forward as allies rather than rivals." "I would like that very much," Elena said sincerely. "And I hope you will consider joining the trauma treatment programs. Your insights into military strategy and noble house politics could help us reach populations we have not yet been able to serve." Seraphine smiled. "I am already assembling a team from my own territories. It seems I am better suited to building programs than being queen anyway. Strange how things work out." She moved away, and Garrett replaced her, his scarred face serious but not unkind. "Your Majesty," he said to Elena, using her new title for the first time, "I owe you an apology. I doubted your strategic value when Marcus first elevated you. I was focused on military assets and traditional alliances. I failed to see that the most important strategic asset a king can have is clarity of mind and strength of purpose. You gave him both. That makes you invaluable." "Thank you, Commander," Elena said quietly. "But I think we gave each other those things. Partnership means both people contribute and both people grow." "Wise words from a new queen," Garrett said. "I suspect you will teach us all quite a bit about leadership before this is done." The celebration continued into the evening, but eventually Marcus and Elena slipped away from the crowds and found a quiet spot overlooking the valley. The lights of the camp twinkled below them, and the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "We did it," Elena said softly. Against considerable odds and strong opposition, we actually did it. You did it, Marcus corrected. I just had the good sense to recognize your worth and the stubbornness to defend that recognition when others questioned it. We did it together, Elena insisted. That is what partnership means. Shared success, shared struggle, shared responsibility for outcomes good and bad. She leaned against his shoulder, and Marcus wrapped his arm around her, holding her close in the cooling evening air. What happens now? She asked. We are married, the programs are expanding, the peace with Valdris is holding. What comes next? Now we lead, Marcus said simply. We make good on all the promises we made. We ensure the trauma programs actually help the people they are designed to serve. We raise Adrian to understand that leadership is service and power is responsibility. We build a kingdom where worth is recognized, regardless of origin, and strength is valued in all its forms. That is a lot of work, Elena observed. Yes, Marcus agreed, but we do not have to do it alone. We have Roderick and Garrett and Thomas. We have Seraphine as ally instead of enemy. We have the Council's grudging support that might become genuine partnership given time. We have each other. That is more than enough to start with. They stayed there watching the stars until Adrian found them, the child escaping his nursemaid to climb into their laps and demand they all watch the sky together. Marcus held his son with one arm and his wife with the other, and felt more complete than he had since before Isabella's death. Not unmarked by loss, not untouched by grief, but whole in a new configuration that honored the past while building toward the future. The months that followed brought the expected challenges and the unexpected rewards that come with profound change. The trauma treatment programs expanded rapidly, with Elena and Thomas training cohorts of new medics every 6 weeks. Recovery rates held steady at 60% for chronic cases, validating the methods and justifying the resources. The revised grain distribution reforms were implemented without the unintended harm that had marked the first attempt. Working merchants like Henrik Thorne were able to continue their businesses while price gouging was effectively prevented. The hardship fund Elena had established helped families affected by the original implementation, and young Elise Thorne received the treatments she needed, her health slowly improving under the care of capital healers. Henrik himself appeared at the palace 3 months after the wedding, requesting an audience with Elena. Marcus accompanied her to the meeting, curious what the merchant wanted. Your Majesty, Henrik said, bowing deeply to Elena, I came to thank you personally. My daughter's treatments are working. She can breathe easier now, play with other children. The doctors say she may fully recover given time. Elena's relief was visible. I am so glad. And your business? The revised reforms are working for you? They are, Henrik confirmed. The new regulations distinguish between honest merchants and price gougers, as they should have from the beginning. I have been able to rehire my workers and reopen the closed storage facility. More than that, I have been working with Lord Castor to create a merchants' council that advises the Crown on economic policy impacts. We want to help prevent future unintended consequences. Marcus saw the wisdom in this immediately. That is an excellent proposal. Elena, what do you think? I think we should have thought of it ourselves, Elena said. Having the people affected by policy help shape that policy makes perfect sense. Henrik, I would be honored if you would lead this Merchants' Council. The establishment of the Merchants' Council marked a shift in how the kingdom approached governance. Other advisory groups followed. A Veterans Council to guide trauma treatment expansion, a Farmers' Council to inform agricultural policy. Voices that had been unheard were suddenly essential to decision-making. But the most profound changes were cultural. Noble families across the kingdom began to reconsider what they valued in their daughters and sons. The shift started slowly, almost invisibly, then gathered momentum like water finding new channels after a dam breaks. High Lord Ashmore appeared at Marcus's study 6 months after the wedding, his granddaughter Lissa beside him. The old lord looked uncomfortable but determined. Your Majesty, Ashmore began formally, my granddaughter has a request. Lissa stepped forward, her gray eyes holding Marcus's gaze with impressive directness. Your Majesty, I wish to petition for a position in the Veteran Trauma Treatment Program. I want to train as a medic under Queen Elena's protocols. Marcus studied the young woman. She was 18 at most, raised in privilege, groomed for a strategic marriage alliance. What prompted this choice, Lady Lissa? I watched Queen Elena serve at Fort Raven, Lissa said. I read the reports from the infirmary programs. I studied the methods she developed. And I realized that I want to contribute something real to the kingdom, something that helps people in tangible ways rather than simply advancing my family's position through marriage. She glanced at her grandfather, then back to Marcus. Marriage alliances matter, I understand that, but they are not the only way to serve. Queen Elena proved that competence and dedication can be worth more than connections. I want to follow her example. And your family supports this? Marcus asked, looking at Ashmore. The old lord's expression mixed pride with discomfort. I will not claim to be entirely comfortable with how much Queen Elena has changed our kingdom's social structure, Your Majesty. My granddaughter choosing service over strategic marriage would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. But I cannot deny that the choice is honorable, perhaps more honorable than the path I had planned for her. He straightened his shoulders. If Lissa wishes to train as a trauma specialist, I will support her decision, even as I privately acknowledge how strange it feels to see the old certainties crumble. Queen Elena has shown us that the kingdom is stronger when we value all forms of contribution, not just those that benefit noble houses directly. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of how deeply the changes had taken root. Ashmore, the voice of tradition, supporting his granddaughter's unconventional choice, was more significant than a dozen formal policy changes. Lady Lissa, Elena said, entering the study at that moment. She must have been informed of the meeting. If you are serious about this training, you should know it is difficult and emotionally demanding work. You will train alongside common-born medics with no special treatment for your rank. You will see things that will haunt you and carry weights that will change you. Are you prepared for that? Lissa met Elena's eyes steadily. I am prepared to try, Your Majesty. And if I fail, at least I will fail attempting something meaningful rather than succeeding at something that feels hollow. Elena smiled with genuine warmth. Then report to Healer Thomas tomorrow morning. He will assess your skills and assign you a mentor. Welcome to the service, Lissa. After they left, Marcus pulled Elena into his arms. Do you understand what just happened? Ashmore, who fought your elevation at every turn, just brought his own granddaughter to train in your programs. That is not grudging acceptance. That is cultural transformation. Elena leaned into his embrace. One young woman choosing service over status is not transformation yet, but it is a beginning. If others follow, if the pattern spreads, then perhaps we really will build the kingdom we promised to those 427 who died. A kingdom where worth is recognized regardless of birth. Over the following months, others did follow. 12 noble daughters joined the trauma programs. 8 noble sons requested positions in the reformed grain distribution network, wanting to ensure fair implementation. The pattern spread beyond the capital as word traveled that the Queen valued competence over connections. The Valdres Treaty solidified into genuine partnership. Cassius sent his own son to study Elena's methods, and together they established a joint training academy at the border where medics from both kingdoms learned trauma treatment protocols. Veterans who had once faced each other as enemies now worked side by side, healing those who came after them. Elena became known not as the servant who became queen, but as the queen who never forgot the value of service. She continued to work in the infirmaries when her ceremonial duties allowed, continued to refine protocols and train new medics, continued to demonstrate that authority and humility were not opposites, but complements. Marcus led with the clarity that Elena's partnership had restored, making difficult decisions with the confidence that came from knowing he did not carry the burden alone. Together they navigated the complex challenges of governance, learning to balance competing interests and make choices that minimized harm while pursuing good. Roderick and Garrett, witnessing the changes, adapted their own approaches. The War Council meetings became more inclusive, incorporating perspectives from soldiers of all ranks rather than just senior officers. The burden of command remained heavy, but it was distributed more widely, carried by many hands rather than crushing a few. Even Seraphine transformed in ways that surprised those who had known her as purely ambitious. Working with Garrett, she established trauma treatment programs across the Eastern Territories, using her noble connections to secure resources and her newfound understanding of service to ensure programs actually helped rather than simply appearing impressive. She and Garrett eventually married in a quiet ceremony that emphasized partnership over spectacle, their union built on shared purpose rather than political calculation. And every evening, without fail, the three of them gathered in the garden to scatter seeds and watch birds and remind themselves that the largest changes begin with the smallest acts of caring. Adrian, now learning tactics from his father and compassion from his mother, grew into a child who understood that true strength required both courage and kindness. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Adrian asked a question that surprised them both with its insight. "Papa, Mama, when I am king someday, how will I know if I am doing it right?" Marcus and Elena exchanged glances. Then Marcus answered carefully, "You will know you are doing it right when you wake up each morning and ask yourself that same question. The moment you stop questioning, the moment you become certain you have all the answers, that is when you will start making mistakes." Elena added her own wisdom. "And you will know you are doing it right when the people you serve are better off than they were yesterday. Not all of them, not all at once, but enough of them often enough that the trajectory is toward greater good." Leadership is not about perfection. It is about consistent effort in the right direction. Adrian considered this seriously, like scattering seeds for the birds. We cannot make every bird come. We cannot control what happens to every seed. But we keep doing it because some birds will come and some seeds will grow, and that is enough. Marcus pulled his son close, marveling at the child's understanding. "Exactly like that," he said. "Exactly like that." As the stars emerged and the night deepened, the three of them remained in the garden, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice and commitment, and the daily work of caring for each other. The small Omega, who had once been invisible, had become a queen by proving that worthiness comes from character, not circumstance. The warrior king, who had nearly broken under the weight of command and grief, had found healing in partnership with someone who understood that strength and vulnerability were not opposites, but partners. And the child who had been locked in traumatic silence had found his voice again, learning from both parents that leadership meant service, that power meant responsibility, and that the greatest courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to care despite it. This was their story, not a fairy tale of magical transformation, but a real account of real people making hard choices and living with consequences and building something meaningful from the materials available to them. It was a story about seeds and birds and trauma and healing and the many forms that courage can take. Most of all, it was a story about love, not as escape or rescue, but as the choice to show up every day and do the work of caring, to scatter seeds even when outcomes are uncertain, to watch for birds even when the sky seems empty, to believe that small acts matter and people can change and tomorrow might be different because of choices made today. In the garden, the birds would always come, drawn by seeds scattered with patience and hope and the understanding that some things are worth doing simply because they are kind. And kindness, as Elena had proven and Marcus had learned and Adrian would carry forward, was the foundation upon which everything else worth building must rest.